Hi, welcome to the LaunchDarkly Technology Migration Summit. I'm John Kodumal, CTO and co-founder of LaunchDarkly, and joining me is Kate Holterhoff, Analyst at RedMonk. Kate, thank you so much for joining me today. I would love to hear a little bit about your background and the work that you're doing for RedMonk. And for those of in the audience that aren't familiar with RedMonk, maybe just a little bit of a primer on what RedMonk does in their focus area.
Sure. So I'm an analyst with RedMonk, and RedMonk is a really cool analyst firm. We are a tech analyst firm that focuses on developers. So we really listen to practitioners when we're thinking about industry trends, and we are thought leaders in the developer experience and open source space in particular. And before that, I was an academic for 10 years, actually. So I won't dig too deep into my background, but I got my PhD at Carnegie Mellon and then moved into teaching at Georgia Tech, did the teaching thing for about a decade, and then became a front-end engineer for a while, and then heard the siren call of analyst work, and have been doing this now for about a year and a half.
Awesome, thank you so much. So we're here to talk about migration. So let's start at the beginning. How do we define migrations? How do we think about what a migration is, and what kinds of migrations are companies usually engaging in?
Yeah, so we don't want to get into too much definitional issues here, because I think when we think about migrations, we want to go with the sort of broadest sense. So a migration is just replacing one functional system with another. But I think when we talk about migrations in this industry, we're usually thinking about modernizing them. So what that typically entails is replacing a monolith with microservices. And of course that it brings with it all kinds of other issues. Databases are sort of the most notoriously difficult to migrate. And I mean, just to jump into the sort of elephant in the room immediately, executives don't want to migrate. Migrations are always problematic, they're expensive, they take a lot of effort, and so they're to be avoided at all costs. But increasingly, we're seeing the need for digital transformation, and so it's something that we're certainly following in the industry and trying to find ways of mitigating the pains that are always attendant on migration.
Are migrations, are they things that only like antiquated or older teams have to do, or legacy software stacks, or are migrations things that are kind of like the natural order of things? Are you bound to do a migration when you have a sufficiently useful piece of software that's used in production?
Yeah, I mean, in a word, yes. We are always migrating. And so I think what we're typically hearing in terms of migrations is continuous migration. So there is no space in between. It's something that's going to be happening all the time. So migrations are something that organizations are going to need to be thinking about on a consistent basis. It's not something where you've done something wrong and this is sort of penance for making bad decisions in the past. It's something that is always going to be happening. And so anyone who follows the history of the industry is going to see that there's ways that we are replacing our systems in this sort of progressive way, consistently, and it has nothing to do with a sort of judgment call, but the idea of just lifting and shifting your infrastructure isn't going to work. That when you migrate, you're also going to want to use some of the newest technology that's available to you.
Yeah, I think one of the things I observe is like technology is moving so quickly. So even when you've got a brand new system, a greenfield system, within a year, within 2 years, there are aspects of it that you might want to migrate to the newest tech stack. We kind of felt this ourselves at LaunchDarkly. When we started the company, it was actually like in that period where it wasn't clear that Kubernetes had won. And so there was like Kubernetes and Mesosphere, and we actually built on top of Mesosphere. And then it turned out we made the wrong technology choice, not in terms of what capabilities it provided, but rather what became the industry standard. And so we ended up having to do a migration on that basis alone. So sometimes it's not the choices you made, but the choices the industry as a whole makes around what ends up being the winning technology.
That's right.
Yeah, I thought that was a fascinating aspect of like our own migration story. Tell me a little bit more about some of the trends that you're seeing when you talk to companies in the software space. What kinds of migrations are they doing? You mentioned monoliths to microservices. What are some of the other things you're seeing? Are you seeing a lot of cloud migrations, multi-cloud?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's beginning to, important to kind of set the scene here. So, the cloud era began in 2006. So for 17 years now, we've been in an infrastructure as a service sort of ecosystem. And so a lot of companies that were ready to migrate have done so. So this isn't a sort of new problem. This is something that a lot of, that is sort of an established sort of reality in the industry. So, just to kind of, level set, now we're seeing all kinds of interesting innovations with that space. One important trend that we're definitely seeing is with apps that help companies accomplish their modernization needs. So vFunction, for instance, allows you to modernize your Java applications, and then VMware has one as well. So we're seeing, some kind of industries that are growing up out of this need to migrate. Another important one would be the prominence of open source, right? As you mentioned, Kubernetes, but also like Apache Kafka and Postgres are all these sort of technologies that allow companies to migrate without being locked in to a particular vendor. And so they're becoming a lot more appealing to a lot of organizations. And then a third one that I would mention would be the COVID-19 pandemic. Digital transformation really took off because of that. So we can think of Satya Nadella. He talked about the digital transformation accelerating from sort of 2 years to 2 months. The pace, you mentioned acceleration, the pace of digital transformation has just surpassed anything that anyone anticipated before the pandemic. So the need to migrate, the need to modernize is becoming extremely important, and organizations are realizing that things that maybe were happening on-prem no longer can happen in that way. I'm probably going to talk a little bit about the skills gap, since that's something that my own research certainly aligns with as an ex-academic. But the ways that certifications are happening now, they needed to modernize that whole process, because no longer were folks able to go to an on-premise testing location. They have to test in the comfort of their home with their toddlers knocking on the door, and pots rattling in their kitchen, and they're trying to pass a really expensive exam that they've been studying for months, years, what have you. So anyways, but that's I think a sort of example of how things have changed significantly because of this the situation that came out of the pandemic, and all the sort of the good and bad that attended to it.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned earlier that people are kind of like loath to do migrations, like you'd prefer not to do migration. And,
yes.
And I think underlying that is a combination of like fear, because migrations can be dangerous, but also questions about the value of a migration, because oftentimes I think with migrations, you described it as like shifting from one functional system to another. You're not necessarily having direct customer impact from that migration itself. The migration exists to unlock some future, some new technology that you want to invest in. So like, if you're an engineering leader, how do you think about justifying the migration? Like going to your business leader and saying, hey, I need resources in order to accomplish this. How do you see engineering leaders doing that?
Yeah, well, a lot of it's going to come down to cost. The cost savings of going with a new provider for either your database or some other part of your infrastructure can't be overstated. And that's why multi-cloud has really become important to a lot of organizations' strategies, is that they now have this opportunity to use a variety of cloud providers in order to ensure that they get the lowest costs. There's also the advantages of resiliency. They're also allowed to take advantage of certain functionality advantages that some cloud providers offer that others don't. So for instance, like GCP offers BigQuery, which is, has a lot of adamant followers. So there's a lot of advantages to going multi-cloud with your strategy, and ensuring that you're, that when you're migrating to a sort of new infrastructure, that you're taking advantage of all the different opportunities that can come out of that.
So we touched on this a little bit earlier, but when we do a migration, it's not necessarily because we've made a wrong or incorrect technology choice. Oftentimes it's like other external factors that are requiring us to change the system in use in some fundamental way. Let's talk about that for a minute. What are some of the reasons that you've seen for people having to go through migrations beyond just the obvious, something's not working at all?
Yeah, for sure. I think there's a lot of history here, so we could probably talk about some of the big examples where this has happened. So the one that immediately comes to mind would be the Oracle database. So a number of different enterprises have spoken about leaving Oracle. And in 2008, when they raised the price about 20%, we hear stories about executives calling their IT departments in a panic and saying, "How do we migrate off of Oracle? This is this is untenable. We can't make this. This can't be how we continue with paying for our database services." But when the IT departments took time to explain the cost, the labor, the pain involved with migrating off of Oracle's database, they agreed to pay it and weren't able to migrate. And I think probably the best and most humorous example of this was when Larry Ellison of Oracle and Andy Jassy of AWS got in a very public spat in 2018 over AWS's plans to leave Oracle's database behind. And so their tweets were flying, and I think Jassy tweeted #DBFreedom, which is pretty hilarious. They were relatively successful in migrating off of that. But I think what that example demonstrates is actually the costs involved, because it was a marketing stunt for them to leave behind the Oracle database as a way of promoting their own products. They wanted to make sure that they were, highlighting, Aurora and some of the AWS products that were going to be replacing it. So not every company has the liberty to spend as lavishly on their migration plan as AWS did in that case. And of course, there was a lot of pain involved with that migration. It took them over a decade, and they were mocked. When on Black Friday there were some issues with their database, and they were in the subsequent write-ups were attributed to some mismanaged issues with that very migration. So. This is the sort of more public things. I don't think that we always see, what the actual pain. People don't want to publicize that unless they have a real good reason to go jousting at one another in this public way for tweets, or on Twitter rather. But those are the sort of go-to examples. I guess another important one would also be with the federal government. So the IRS has historically, dealt with trying to migrate off Kennedy era, infrastructure and their code base being written in assembly and COBOL, and they still haven't been able to successfully modernize their applications. In a sense, assembly works, and so the criticality of the systems that are being modernized must be taken into account when you're trying to think about how am I going to do this? What sort of what is the give and take here? Well, how are we going to do this in the best way possible? And of course, the idea of breaking down when you're taking a monolith and trying to create microservices around it, you want to make sure that you do this in a gradual way. And so, there's a number of different sort of patterns that IT professionals will follow, DevOps teams, the Strangler fig pattern that Martin Fowler popularized as a sort of common go-to for this, where you are taking the monolith and then a little bit at a time creating microservices. So you don't want to do everything at once. You want to make sure that you're modernizing and migrating your critical infrastructure in a gradual way and trying to de-risk it as much as possible.
I think that's a great point to talk about the connection between migrations and feature management. So how can feature management be impactful in sort of that breaking down or that process of making things more gradual in a migration?
Well, it's an essential tool, I would say. I mean, anything that you can do to support the more gradual transfer of your sort of legacy infrastructure into a new sort of refactored code base and plan for your architecture that takes advantage of a lot of the cloud native capabilities. So if you're going to, say, go serverless, just lifting and shifting a monolith onto the cloud is a terrible idea. You want to make sure that you gradually using feature flags and other tools. So we talked a little about app modernization tools, using the resources that you have available in order to make sure that you're doing things in a way that de-risks as much as possible. That you create some sort of redundancies so that you have the support that you need in order to make sure that this happens in the best possible way, that you have the support that you need from not only the executives at the top. I mean, a lot of digital transformation conversations discuss culture as being an extremely important part of this whole plan. So making sure that you have the resources available and feature flags can be an extremely useful part of that whole toolbox.
Awesome. Let's go back to the fear component. We talked a little bit about engineering leaders and their fear and reluctance to go through migrations. What are some of the failure modes that happen when you go through a poorly planned migration, where you don't have the right tools or people or processes around to help you support that migration?
Well, there's a number of red flags that companies can look for. So if you have performance issues, that's a good indicator that you have tried to modernize too quickly and that there's some sort of failure happening. Other indications would be time issues. If you notice that the database is having some sort of timing problems, that is another good indication that things are not migrating as well as they should have. So again, doing things in a gradual way, making sure that you have the visibility into the system to make sure that it's happening in a way that you had anticipated, and that also that you have a fallback, that you are able to roll back changes and turn off some of these new features. It will help to alleviate a lot of that fear, but also make sure that if something does go wrong, you're able to go back to an earlier state that doesn't have these issues.
So we touched on some of the tools that might be helpful in supporting migrations. Let's talk a little bit about culture and processes. What are some of the things that you would need to have in place in an organization in order to enable a successful migration?
Well, you want to make sure that the entirety of the organization is involved, that you're not just having, say, the IT department focus on this. You want to make sure that you have buy-in across the organization. And this has become especially important as more teams have become cross-functional. So we see these initiatives to cross-skill organizations so that not only do we avoid knowledge silos, but we're making sure that all parts of the organization know what's going on elsewhere. And so a lot of studies that have been coming out of the Harvard Business Review and MIT's Sloan Business Management Journal really speak to the importance of this idea that everyone is aware of what's happening and that they're ensuring that they're going to have the most successful outcome. So in terms of how this generally happens, a lot of different thought leaders have, they look at the R's, I've seen 7 R's, 9 R's, but the idea of refactoring, recoding, replatforming, all of these R's are an important part of this. But I think maybe the one that we would want to focus on first is assessing what you actually have. And so there's been a number of different, leaders in the field who have thought about how to best go from this monolith to breaking it down to microservices so that you can take advantage of a containerized infrastructure. And so making sure that you have your engineers thinking through what you already have and how all these different components are working together to make sure that you don't have some sort of catastrophic failure, because monoliths are all interconnected, right? I mean that's the sort of nature of them. And so when we modularize these sort of sprawling architectures, we want to make sure that we do it in the best possible way. And so again, there's been a lot of different tools that have come out of this. I know we're going to be talking about AI soon in this conversation. We can't help it. It's 2023. But as we move into an environment where our ability to peer into the code base is improving dramatically, and we've got now the tools to ensure that we can de-risk this process as much as possible, the burden of trying to make sure that all those connections are being accounted for is coming off of the shoulders of just engineers, and we can automate that. So that's the sort of process that we're seeing at RedMonk in order to use the available tools and strategies and best practices that the industry can offer.
I think every engineering leader has been on a project that they've realized at some point during the progress of it, it's not going in the right direction. Either it's off schedule, or the costs are running too high, or they're seeing some significant warning signs. I'm certain this happens with modernization efforts too. What are some of the warning signs, and is it ever justifiable to just pull the plug?
For sure. So, we could return to that, the example of the IRS as being sort of the go-to for modernization that just hasn't worked out. And so absolutely, a COBOL system that works is preferable to a more modern Java app that doesn't. So you want to make sure that you're migrating in a way that maintains the functionality of that. And again, you want to think about the criticality of that work. Even though everybody wants to take advantage of the new bells and whistles that new infrastructure enables, right? So moving from, say, batch processing to real-time streaming, certainly is something that most enterprises would like, but the costs might outweigh the benefits of that. And that is particularly true with AI. I mean, there's been a whole new breed of databases that have come out of this, but again, the notoriously difficult process of moving from this newfangled vector database out of something that's a little more established, such as Postgres, just might not make sense for a company, especially in this economic climate.
Are there any examples in industry of companies going forward with a migration and then realizing, even after the completion of that modernization effort, that they didn't get the business impact that they wanted and they actually had to go back?
Yeah, one of the more compelling stories that I know about that is with a company called Segment, who it was in 2020 acquired by Twilio, but in 2018 they wrote a blog post about the fact that they needed to move from microservices to a monolith because they didn't have the DevOps engineers in order to maintain the complexity of the infrastructure that they were using. And so I think that this is a really interesting example for a number of reasons. For one, it ties in a sort of theme that we see across the board that I guess kind of signifies the importance of a cultural change when you're thinking about a modernization strategy, and that is with the skills gap. So again and again in the paper, in the sort of literature about modernization, you see that digital transformation can be stymied by not having an adequate number of folks who are able to do it. And so even though I know that there's been a lot of hand-wringing recently about layoffs, there still is a significant lack of individuals who are able to write the sort of distributed systems that are required by these containerized applications. And so, Segment kind of brings that to the fore in a really, I think, compelling and public way. And I haven't seen a follow-up from that blog post, so I don't know where they stand on it right now. Maybe now that they're part of Twilio, they've decided to go back to microservices. But in any event, there was some interesting discussion about how the complexity created more problems than they solved, and so moving to a monolith made sense. And of course, a lot of folks have defended monoliths. I mean, it's certainly reductive to say that all monoliths are bad. Sometimes they make sense. Folks like DHH have defended monoliths. He wrote a post in 2016, I think, about just that. So there's been a lot of thought leaders who have said, we got to stop saying that containerization is the answer to everything. That we always want to use microservices, but depending on the sort of workload that we're dealing with, and depending on how important your multi-cloud strategy is, there can be a lot of advantages to moving off of a monolith, but you want to look at what the business case is in every particular instance.
I think a lot of engineering leaders have this pretty typical dilemma. There's too many projects and not enough engineering resources to execute on those projects. And so it can be tempting to go after new features, to ship more things to customers and not invest in things like application modernization or a big database migration or other investments back into paying down technical debt. What happens to teams that don't adequately invest in these types of efforts?
Yeah, well, I mean, the problem is that the longer you wait, the more painful it's going to be. So the idea of recognizing that you are going to have to modernize and putting it off indefinitely is something that I think teams want to avoid. So we're certainly recommending that organizations who recognize the fact that the need for modernization can't be put off any longer do well to make it a priority. But yeah, I can see that would be sort of problematic, but the idea of it being painful is always going to be top of mind for executives. I mean, the stories, well publicized or otherwise, of modernization's gone wrong are well known, and even though the Harvard Business Review has tried to contextualize and alleviate the sort of old chestnut of that 70% of digital transformations fail. This has been overturned by recent research. It still is sort of top of mind for folks who are thinking about trying to modernize their apps.
We talked about decomposition as being an essential component to a successful migration, breaking things down into small pieces. Mm-hmm. How do you actually accomplish that in practice?
Well, I'll leave the technical aspects to the DevOps leadership, but the basic idea is that you're going to try to modularize your app and make sure that you can use APIs in order to use the best practices for communicating through microservices and using the infrastructure capabilities that are available to teams now and that are considered best practices. So decomposing a monolith especially is certainly something that folks want to think about doing using best in breed tools such as feature flags.
Let's kind of like widen the aperture a little bit and talk about emerging technologies and trends. What are you kind of excited about? What are you seeing as being some technology trends? Maybe as they even relate to this idea of technology migrations and modernization.
Well, AI has been top of mind for everyone in the field, I think. So we're seeing ways that with by virtue of large language models, we're able to take advantage of this knowledge of code bases that is happening in a quicker way than teams are able to move, and that we're able to use AI in order to leverage sort of known best practices and golden paths in order to modernize in a more successful way. So tools like Copilot kind of give us a glimpse into what is going to be possible in the future. But even vFunction is using AI as part of their tool for refactoring systems, and and they're part of this sort of larger trend of continuous migration. So if we think about the need to migrate and the need to modernize, it's not something that is a one and done, but something that needs to happen in a consistent manner. A lot of AI tools that are coming out now are going to help us to do that because they can automate the process. They can take away a lot of the pain. They can be a little bit more exacting, doing that sort of detail work. I mean, nobody wants to work on brownfield projects, right? It's greenfield that's the sort of fun, glamorous thing. And so if we think about the reason that teams are looking to modernize, as much as COBOL engineers might get paid a lot, they're it's not a fun language to work on, right? People want to work on Ruby on Rails and other sort of more desirable stacks.
When we think about larger organizations going through a migration, it seems like a much more challenging task. Like imagine a financial services company with like 10,000 engineers that's having to go through a migration. Are there unique challenges that some of these larger organizations face, maybe around standardization of technology or like governance requirements? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, again, the pain of migrating is always top of mind for folks, but the larger and more complex and more legacy an organization is, the more difficult it is to modernize. And organizations need to take a step back and say, what is it that we actually want to accomplish through our modernization strategy? Is it that we want to take advantage of some of the newest and shiniest tech that moving to a more cloud-native architecture is going to enable, or is it something where we just want to do it to say that we've done it, right? And if it's the latter, then maybe pause and try to decide if that's something that's actually going to be a worthwhile endeavor. But it's certainly something that since the beginning of the cloud era, which is we're getting on to 20 years now, is something that a lot of organizations are beginning to feel the need for, especially in our post-pandemic world where folks are on their mobile devices. They need the apps to work immediately in real time. These sort of services are just not available for a lot of legacy systems.
What do you see on the horizon for the rest of 2023, especially as it relates to digital transformation?
Yeah, well, I think we're going to see more and more tooling in the app modernization space. And so I'm really excited to see how different companies are supporting engineers, especially in this move. And we hear a lot about the multi-cloud strategies that are going to be a part of this this transformation. There's a lot of important work that's being done with ensuring that organizations are taking advantage of infrastructure as a service in its broadest sense. And so if you're thinking about avoiding lock-in and taking advantage of open source, there's a lot of opportunity there to ensure that your organization is modernizing in a way that utilizes best practices in the industry. And then of course I've showed you my hand in terms of my excitement for AI. I think that we're going to continue to see a lot of improvements in ways that we can automate and use technology in order to take away the pain of the sort of boring work of taking a sort of brownfield project and breaking it apart and sort of refactoring it and rewriting it. Anything that can help us to avoid trying to chisel away at ancient legacy code that maybe isn't doing all the sort of bells and whistles that we would hope that our newer capabilities have enabled. I think that those are going to be the sort of most important and the shiniest things that are going to come out of the next 5 years.
So, closing question for you, Kate. What's one piece of advice that you would give to an engineering leader that's going through one of these application modernization, digital transformation / technology migration stories in 2023?
All right, well, don't go too quickly, but don't go too slowly. So, classic analyst line, it depends, right? But, making sure that you're supporting your IT department by giving them the sort of golden paths that they need and the educational skill set that they are going to require in order to make sure that they have the needed expertise in order to be successful with these new technologies, and then making sure that they also have the best tools available. So that will include not only having access to feature flags, but also making sure that they have access to the cloud provider that is going to support the sort of workload that they're going to be needing, and making sure that they're being asked to the table when a lot of these decisions are made.
Kate, thank you so much for your time. It was a real pleasure, and I learned a ton.
It's been fun, John.
Up next, we've got Paul and Adam, who are going to be sharing 3 best practices for doing database migrations.